On today's podcast,
one of the tools of functional medicine is a timeline. But I don't like to think of it as a timeline. I like to think of it as a staircase. And at each, drop, most people don't just say, well, I was absolutely perfectly well, and then I get hit by a bus. That would be one way. That would be one really big step. But most people get unwell in these increments, right? And the question is, at this last increment, what happened? What was surrounding that? And we're looking at each of these steps. We're trying to reascend the step back to wellness. We're asking the question, what are the antecedents? What are the triggers? What are the mediators?
if you're a healthcare provider tired of just treating symptoms and ready to dig deeper into the root causes of health issues, the Vibrant Wellness Podcast is for you. With insider tips, expert interviews, and the latest in biotech research, this podcast will take your patient care to the next level. Hello, and welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jen Rivas, and I have with me our very own root cause detective, Dr. Emmy Brown. Dr. Emmy, how you doing?
That's a new one. Thanks, Jen. I'm doing well, and I'm going to a baseball game tonight, so I'm excited about that, and the sun is out.
Yeah, it's coming. Well, awesome. Prepare to be inspired as we dive deeper into the world of whole life wellness with our distinguished guest, Dr. Thomas Sult of Just Be Well. His mission is to elevate wellness to such a level that illness simply cannot thrive. Their practice adopts a systems biology-based approach. Dr. Sult recognizes the profound connection between our biological and emotional hearts, and that true health cannot be achieved without nurturing both. With nearly 30 years of experience in functional medicine, he has dedicated his career to helping individuals overcome both the physiological and non-physiological conditions. When he's not teaching internationally or enlightening his patients, you can find Dr. Sult enjoying the company of his family and dogs. So get ready for a transformative discussion as we explore the holistic approach to wellness with Dr. Thomas Sult. Dr. Sult, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's a sunny day here. We've been under the cloud of Canadian and Boundary Waters fires recently. It was just brown and terrible. But today, it's a blue sky, so life is good.
Good. Yes, we're on the same boat. Perfect. We're so happy to have you, Dr. Salt. I'm going to kick it off with you today. And as a licensed naturopathic doctor, I'm familiar with functional medicine, yet my training and doctorate degree program is in naturopathy, and functional medicine is a bit different. The training is a little bit different. So I'd love to define what it means because we throw this term around so often. So many different practitioners are interested in functional medicine. So I'd like to really illustrate what it means to you. And before I open it up to you, I found your website very helpful in terms of the very beautifully written statements you have on there illustrating what functional medicine is. So I just want to read a couple because I found that these were very helpful to put together the pieces for me and I think for our listeners. First one being, functional medicine will repair our broken healthcare system. It's a fundamental change in our thinking, a whole different paradigm, like the world is round, not flat shift. Second one being, wellness is the optimal expression of your genes as they interact with the totality of your environment. I think that's so well put. I really appreciated reading that. So before we jump into the ins and outs of functional medicine, what led you away from your conventional training and practice into functional medicine?
Yeah. So as a kid and growing up, I was, really into health and wellness and I was the weird kid who was eating my broccoli and all that kind of stuff. Right? And then I didn't get into med school. I applied to 42 U.S. medical schools and didn't get a single interview.
Wow.
And so I was sort of licking my wounds and wondering what I was going to do for my life. And I went to acupuncture school at a school that now doesn't exist. And while I was there studying acupuncture, people were talking about foreign medical schools. And, I can barely speak English, let alone, learn Spanish to go to Guadalajara or something. So I thought, well, that's ridiculous. And then I found this school in Caribbean called St. George's, and applied and got in. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to live in the basement of a kind of a well-to-do Ghanaian family that was really interested in preserving indigenous culture. And they were particularly interested in traditional medicine. In the Caribbean, they have this thing called bush medicine. And I thought it was like bush, like, Australia, the bush, but no, bush is a plant, and it's herbal medicine is what they're talking about when they talk about bush medicine. So I had the opportunity to do some things with these bush doctors in Grenada, and it was really fascinating. Then I was able to transfer to UCLA after 2 years in Grenada and finished my training at UCLA. But there, Norman Cousins was at that time the head of the Office of Psychoneuroimmunology, which of course is a fancy way of saying holistic medicine. And I became like his disciple at his feet, right? And he had written, he's not even a physician, he's a writer, and he had written a book about his own illness called Anatomy of an Illness, where he cured his ankylosing spondylitis with laughter by watching Laurel and Hardy movies and stuff. And that fascinated me, of course. And then, I started thinking about acupuncture and the sort of holism. I started thinking about the bush doctors. I started thinking about Norman Cousins. And I realized that, I had to spend every spare moment, which isn't a lot in medical school, but every spare moment in his office. And I became the guy who, in med school, you have this little tiny budget that each office has their own budget. And the psychoneuroimmunology, I think they had $10 per year. So I was sneaking into the surgery office and making photocopies for our webinars and stuff. And that set the stage for, gosh, there's got to be something bigger. And I had been, reading Jonathan Wright's columns in, various magazines, even before med school during college. So I had a little understanding. Then I went through residency, family medicine residency. I was doing high risk OB and taking care of people in an ICU and all that kind of stuff. And got all that holistic nonsense kind of, pushed out of my head until I was in private practice. And like one of my very first patients was a woman with chronic fatigue syndrome. And she comes into the office and she says, I'm seeing this natural doctor in Sacramento. I was living in Tahoe, California, Sacramento. And I wonder if you could help me. And my first statement was, well, what the hell is a natural doctor? But he reminded me, I called him up, good guy. And I called him up. I said, what's going on? And he said, well, we kind of follow this guy named Jonathan Wright. And I go, I know that guy. And, Ellen Gaby. And then there's this guy named Jeff Bland and blah, blah, blah. And so he kind of replugged me in. And I started getting, at that time, metabolic update tapes. And then it became preventative medicine update and then functional medicine update. And I started just listening to these tapes and saying, that makes sense. I'm going to try that. And that's how that happened. And then at some point along the way, I actually took over for Jeff Bland, one of his lectures at Applying Functional Medicine Clinical Practice. So there were some sort of big shoes to step into, but seems to have been successful because I've been with him ever since. And so that's my path to this wacky world of holism.
You couldn't escape it. It was like it just kept pulling you back in every time you tried to get away from it. Huh?
Yep, that's exactly right. I was within the event horizon of the black hole.
Well, I know that one of your many accomplishments, Dr. Sult, is being a certified practitioner for the Institute of Functional Medicine, which is no small feat. So I'm curious how that came about and what you're most excited about when it comes to, the current research or the trajectory of functional medicine right now.
So I had been teaching for the Institute for Functional Medicine for a long time before certification was even a thing. I was part of a group that wrote the test and so on. They didn't give us anything. There's no grandfathering. Yeah. So we had to do all the modules, which I'd done anyway. And we had to sit down and take this test, right? So I don't really know what my score is, but you know what they call the guy with the lowest possible passing score on the certified practitioner test? They call him certified, right? And I may well be that guy. I don't know. But it is a bit of a rigorous a program, right? You have to go to AFMCP, you have to go to all the modules, and then you have to take a fairly rigorous test. Right? I mean, it's on par with my regular family medicine boards and so on. It's a big test. So that's how that happened. They don't give you anything. I took all the classes and did all the work and took the test. And I'm extremely excited about functional medicine. As you mentioned earlier, the problem is everybody and their brother says they're doing functional medicine. And the truth is there is a very specific thing that is actually functional medicine, and it is a systems biology approach. It is not the thing you decide to do. It is not the therapeutic. You could do functional medicine in a completely conventional allopathic manner using drugs. That wouldn't be my preferred way to do it, but it could be done that way. So functional medicine is more a framework of thinking and codifying. So instead of thinking about, this person has heart disease, it's, why would this person have heart disease? So I like to say in conventional medicine, the issue becomes the diagnosis is the end of inquiry. And then all treatment is really based on the diagnosis. So once you decide somebody has rheumatoid arthritis, okay, well, we're going to start you on nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories. And if that doesn't work, we'll escalate to DMARS. And if that doesn't work, we'll escalate to biologics. Done. Nobody is saying, well, gee, why? Why would this person have this diagnosis? So I like to say functional medicine, diagnosis is the beginning of inquiry. We want to know what's unique and different about this individual. So one person with, rheumatoid arthritis may have some propensity to inflammation. Another person may have toxicity. Another person may have GI disturbance, whatever it is. It could be, a number of different things. Or they could be like my girlfriend in college who was a self-professed vegan, but she hated vegetables, so she ate ding dongs and hoes all the time. And it could just be diet related. So and that's really, to me, the major difference. And studies are now coming out from Cleveland Clinic and other places that are showing functional medicine to be an economically viable and efficacious model for treatment of chronic complex disease. Very exciting time.
All good stuff. So, and the ins and outs of functional medicine, I know that there's a systems approach, and you elaborate about this on your website. And you mentioned the 7 keys to functional medicine, which you state account for more than 90% of our illnesses and disease. Can you walk us through what those 7 keys to functional medicine are?
Yeah. So let me, I would say there's more than 7. So I'm dating myself with that bit of information.
I wouldn't have known.
But let me just walk through something a little differently. So one of the tools of functional medicine is a timeline. But I don't like to think of it as a timeline. I like to think of it as a staircase. And at each, drop, most people don't just say, well, I was absolutely perfectly well, and then I get hit by a bus. That would be one way. That would be one really big step. But most people get unwell in these increments, right? And the question is, at this last increment, what happened? What was surrounding that? And we're looking at each of these steps. We're trying to reascend the step back to wellness. We're asking the question, what are the antecedents? What are the triggers? What are the mediators? So antecedents are these pre-existing things. They might be genetic. They might be pre-existing traumas. They might be pre-existing illnesses, whatever they are. But we have this antecedent, this predisposing factor, and then triggers the thing that sort of sets you on the path to dis-ease. And then we have mediators, which are those biochemical things that either get locked in a feed-forward loop and keep you unwell, or if harnessed and manipulated properly, propel you back to wellness. So we're always at each one of these steps down, we're looking for antecedents, triggers, and mediators. And then there are our foundation modifiable lifestyle factors. And, you can argue about how many of these things there are, but, there are an infinite number of lifestyle factors. But we talk about diet and nutrition. And so diet and nutrition obviously is important, but I like to talk more about nutritional inefficiencies, because by the time people get to see me, they're already on a grocery bag full of supplements. They don't have any nutritional deficiencies, but many of them have nutritional inefficiencies. So as an example, a blood test might show tons of B12, but it also shows a really high methylmalonic acid or homocysteine or, whatever, or ammonia, showing that they have poor utilization of these B vitamins. So I'm more interested in nutritional inefficiencies, just because nutritional deficiencies, in my practice at least, aren't that common. I would say for people who are doing, I call this tertiary care functional medicine, because most of my patients have been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, been to a lot of practitioners and so on. And then we talk about movement, just moving your body. And I like to say joyous movement or play, not exercise. Exercise is kind of a dirty word, but play. Let's go play. Giving ourselves a minimum of an 8-hour opportunity for sleep at a minimum. People who are unwell probably need longer. And then stress management, as we're going to talk about later, the limbic system and the ANS, autonomic nervous system, and stress, and that just wreaks havoc on us. So stress management. And then, there's a study done in the Netherlands or one of those countries where they have socialized medicine. They have these huge databases, and they looked at the question, if you're 60, what's the most important thing to get you to 100 or 80 or 100 or whatever it was? And it wasn't, the top thing wasn't stop smoking. That was pretty high. It was like number 10 or something. And it wasn't get your flu shot. It wasn't take your medicine. It was social connection. Social connection was more important than just about everything on the list. So social connection is super important. And I think it's the underappreciated part of blue zones. Blue zones are those places in the world where people, have more years in their life, but also more life in their years. And it's social connection that's really powerful. And then around the outside of our matrix, we have the 7 key physiological things like, we call it assimilation, but it's really digestion, absorption. And we have energy, which is mostly about mitochondria, detoxification or kind of thing, transport, and more. So all of that stuff is around the edge. And then in the center, the mental, emotional, and spiritual domains of health, which are hard, right? Because my religion is always going to be better than your religion and vice versa. So these are hard topics. So I usually enter these topics through the lens of the autonomic nervous system and chronic stress and limbic health and all that kind of thing. So I think that's just a way, it's not the only way, it's a way to look at a person in a more holistic, more systems biology kind of framework.
Yeah. There's so many threads we could pull on with that. You just said so much. I think we could dive so deep. And we're going to go into a few of them, but I would love to, looking at your website, Dr. Sult, you really have some beautiful and moving testimonials on there. And I know you've been practicing for some time, so you probably have a slew of them, but is there any case study or patient that really stands out in your mind when it comes to sort of that transformative journey, using functional medicine?
So this is a funny one, I think, because it was one of my very early cases when I was fresh minted medical doctor. And a woman comes into the office and she's got red band syndrome, right? She's just head to toe psoriasis, red, head to toe. And it's ruining her life, right? She's been to the derms and she's been here and she's been there and she's been the other place. And everybody's doing their very best, right? And I sat with her and I said, well, let's try something different. So instead of focusing on her skin, right, I asked the question, well, why would you have this? And we looked at her gut, and her gut was completely gooped up because she was on the standard American diet, SAD diet. And she was toxic, really toxic. I mean, a panel of, heavy metals was, floridly positive, and she had a bunch of persistent organic pollutants, and we just cleaned all that up. Right. And so it's been like 6 months now, and I've sort of lost her to follow up. She was doing great after about 3 months. Most of her psoriasis was gone. And I call her up and I say, "Hi, this is Dr. Sult. I'm just calling to see how your psoriasis is going." She goes, "I don't have psoriasis." I said, "Okay, yeah, but I'm just, how are you doing?" "Well, who is this?" "This is Dr. Sult. And we talked, and I don't know who you are." And and so I think that's just a beautiful testament to how we are capable of just forgetting, right? When things are going well, it's kind of like childbirth, right? It's horrific when it's happening, but then all we remember is the good stuff. I mean, not that I know about childbirth, but I used to deliver babies, so I've witnessed it at least. And it's the same kind of thing. When people get better, it's like you become a trivial piece of their life, right? And I just love that. I love the fact that, it's like I'm not important to her at all. I'm on with my life. So, but that illustrates how, everybody was focused on this one thing. They were focused on her skin, and they were giving her creams and lotions and potions and whatever. And it wasn't helping. Well, it wasn't helping because there wasn't really anything wrong with her skin. Her skin was trying to help her detoxify all this other junk that she had in her body.
That's amazing. I love though that she just completely forgot you.
Yeah.
Well, you just changed my life. You made me better, but
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, it keeps the ego in check, It's
yeah.
like, oh yeah, I forgot. I'm trivial.
Oh, very interesting. Well, and I know we're going to dive deeper into stress management, but I always like to ask because I feel like we can always glean some pearls of wisdom from providers like yourself that are in the trenches day to day. What are some practical habits that you employ on your best days to sort of mitigate stress? Because we are surrounded by it.
Yeah. So we live in an all yang all the time society, right? I mean, you ask people, what do you do for fun? And they say, I do this really yang thing. I go for a run, or I do this, or I do that. Or what I really love is when people say, oh yeah, I play video games. And it turns out the video game is somebody chasing them around trying to kill them. That's not really relaxing. That's awesome. So we have no idea, even when we think we're relaxing, we have no idea. We have no idea that we're not relaxing, right? I mean, sure, we're distracted. And that's what we think. That's really what we think relaxation is just distracted. Now, I'm a big meditator. I like to meditate. I'm actually writing a book on the scientific view of enlightenment called Remind.
Very cool.
And so what do I do on my best days? Well, I play with my dogs. I play with the kids. My wife of 30 years passed away several years ago from cancer. She was given a diagnosis that with a prognosis of measured in months. And through the heroic efforts of her oncologist and functional medicine, she survived 8 years and was able to, witness the birth of a few of her 5 grandchildren. But now I'm remarried, and I have 2 teenage boys in the house, an 8-year-old in the house, which my kids are in their 40s. So that's a whole exciting experience. And they're my most powerful Zen teachers, right? Because they do stuff that sometimes irritates the living crap out of me. And so having to remind myself that there is this space below the narrative mind, and this narrative mind is my idea of where the world should have. There's this place underneath that, the non-narrative mind, which is simply existing and holding as true simply what is happening. And so that's, to me, my focus. My focus is on trying to maintain a level of this, what I call persistent, transcendent, fundamental well-being. I do that through meditation and through mindfulness, just mindfulness in general.
I'm
Love that.
curious just because I know meditation, sorry, I mean, is something you do need to practice, right? It doesn't just come intuitively to many people. Did it take you a while to sort of perfect it? I don't think we ever
Right
perfected.
now, perfection. That's it for sure. Uh, the one thing that's for sure about meditation is that you'll never perfect it. So, there's this idea out there that meditation is clearing your mind. And that's what makes people crazy. People sit down and they close their eyes and they go, "Oh my God, my brain is just so active. I can't meditate." Well, the whole point of meditation is to be aware of all of that craziness going on in your head. That didn't start when you sat down to meditate. That was there. You were just distracted uh, away from seeing it. So when you sit down and close your eyes and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I'm rehearsing the whole day that was and the whole day that's coming. And I'm embarrassed about all the stupid stuff I said. That's happening, right? We all live in this sea of assumptions. And so trying to become clear on what's real and what's an assumption, that's really the focus and goal. That's the real goal of meditation. It's not to clear your mind. I mean, it's lovely when it happens. I mean, when you really, the whole point of like, breath work or whatever, I'm just breathing and I'm feeling the breath around the nostrils. That's just to distract my narrative mind and keep my narrative mind kind of busy so that it'll kind of relax, and then the non-narrative mind emerges, and now I'm sitting in this infinite, beatific. I like to call it the beatific abyss, right? I'm just in this beautiful God space, or whatever you want to call it. And then the noise starts again, and then you got to go, oh yeah, I got to remember to breathe and feel my nostrils again, and you get maybe at the beginning you don't get any of it, and then after a while you get a few seconds, and then as it goes on longer and longer, you get longer periods. And what that does, it slowly widens the gap between stimulus and response. And I like to say that to be truly human is to have control over that moment between stimulus and response. Because, if you're an earthworm and somebody hits you with a battery, all you can do is this, right? But if you're a human, you can be angry or you can laugh. Because it might have been a joke, or it might have been some guy with a taser trying to rob you. It could have been any number of different things. And so that moment where you can choose how you're going to respond, that's true humanity. And so, and that's the purpose of a meditative practice.
Thank you for indulging me. I love that.
You articulated that so well, and I love how you brought in the piece about assumption versus reality. I think everybody can relate to that. We come up with assumptions based on really not much other than, suggested things in our day to day. So I think that's very valuable. And I'd love to use that as a segue to get into the nitty gritty, maybe some of the physiologic components of the stress response, as you mentioned before. And so again, I'm going back to your site because I love some of these these quotes so much. You mentioned, and I'm going to talk about the heart as the number one killer. So you mentioned metabolic syndrome and cardiovascular disease. You say in your site, while the physical heart tirelessly circulates blood through our bodies, the emotional heart resonates with love, compassion, and bravery, or anguishes and loneliness and despair. So how do psychosocial factors impact heart health and metabolic syndrome for that matter?
Yeah. So first of all, it's possible to be a deep introvert like me and sit in a room all by myself and not be lonely. On the other hand, it is possible to be surrounded by people and be lonely. So we have to be careful about what we think about when we think about loneliness. So how do psychosocial factors, and we'll get into it deeper, but let me just start with a little story that I think resonates with a lot of people. If you're chronically in fight or flight, you're shunting blood away from your gut to go to your muscles so that you can fight or you can run, right? That's what fight or flight is. It's I'm either going to stand and fight or I'm going to run, or in even more severe cases, I'm going to freeze, in which case I'll be devoured by the T-Rex or whatever it is. Probably not that, but whatever. So if you think about that, what happens when you shut blood away from your gut? Well, you're going to be functionally malnourished because you're not going to digest and you're not going to absorb efficiently. So you could be eating the most beautiful whole foods and be functionally malnourished. 70% of your immune system lives right there in the gut. It's the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, the gall. So you're going to be functionally immune compromised. In that same circulation is your liver. You're not going to detox well. As your adrenal glands are there, you're not going to have the hormonal stress response that's appropriate to what's going on. And, this is a beautiful system designed for when you're walking down a jungle trail and a saber-tooth tiger jumps in front of you. But today, it's somebody cuts you off on the road, or an IRS letter comes, or your mother gets mad at you, or your wife gets mad at you, or your husband gets mad at you. A million things happen. And it keeps many, many people in this chronic state of fight or flight. And so you can imagine, I used to say, unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise, start in the gut. Well, now I still say that, but now, unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise, I'm going to start in the limbic system. So, what on earth is the limbic system? It's this collection of deep brain structures, right? And these deep brain structures have a bunch of functions. The hippocampus, is mostly about consolidating and retrieving memories. And the amygdala is thought to be about emotional behavior and regulation, although there's some controversy about that. The hypothalamus is sort of the autonomic switching board for the body. It controls, body temperature and hunger and thirst and all that stuff. The thalamus is really a relay center. And then the cingulate cortex regulates cognitive processes. And this whole thing, I like to call it a prioritization, signaling, and amplification system. And the reason why I call it that is because in the most extreme cases, what's supposed to happen, as an example, there should be like a telephone wire connecting the amygdala and the hippocampus, just as an example. But if your amygdala is constantly sending out alarm signals because you're in fight or flight, that little tiny phone wire becomes like the transatlantic cable, right? Probably that's such a dated reference. Nobody knows that there's a giant cable under the sea that used to carry, phone signals across to Europe. But the point is that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you have this alarm system constantly going off, the pathway is going to get more robust. And as it gets more robust, it also becomes more hair triggered, right? So it takes less stimulus to set off that thing. So in the most extreme cases, like people who have multiple chemical sensitivity or electromagnetic sensitivity, any novel stimuli, so a flash of a bright light or a unexpected loud noise or somebody walking by with a strong perfume, or maybe not even a strong perfume, can set off this alarm system. And it will be as if the person has, whatever exposure, maybe it's mycotoxin exposure that made them sick originally. And they just get that same exact symptom, even when there's no mycotoxin to be seen. So, this chronic stress has, it's a weird system. It's this amplification system. And the major dampener of the system is the prefrontal cortex. But in chronic stress, the prefrontal cortex gets shut down. So your prefrontal cortex is impulse control, and it's orchestrating complex neurological processes and all kinds of cognitive processes. And when it's shut down, now you've got this situation where people's memory is impaired, people's judgment is impaired, their ability to delay gratification is impaired, all these terrible things happen. So this chronic stress piece, I think, is really underappreciated as I don't think it's the thing that made you sick, right? The thing that made you sick is probably something else. It's autoinflammation or autoimmunity from a previous infection, or it's toxicity, or it's gut dysbiosis, just an altered microbiome, or many, many things. But it's very likely something that is keeping you sick because it is constantly creating these alarm signals and alarm chemicals, and which equates to inflammatory chemicals in your body constantly.
Right. And so that whole cascade of events after a particular trigger, whatever it may be, you have this propagating via the chronic stress, immune system, cytokines. I mean, and it can go on. And it's really to protect us, but chronically.
Yeah, exactly. I would say the majority of disease is the body trying to protect us. It becomes maladaptive for whatever reason.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure you can see this clinically in so many clear ways after so many years of course and these very common contributing factors. But are there functional medicine labs that you do like to run to really see how this stress manifests physically on a biochemical level?
Yeah. So, first of all, my first test is I ask them, do you ever cry at commercials? If you're watching TV and one of the sappy commercials come on, are you crying? Okay, well, if you are, you're probably stressed out. So, and what is chronic stress? It's involved in everything, right? It increases your risk of cardiovascular disease and immune dysfunction, and metabolic disorder, and, mental health and cognitive stuff, and digestive disorders and sleep disorders, and even chronic pain. So it's wide ranging. And so we may need to investigate any of those things with tests. So, if somebody's presenting complaint is heart disease, well, I'm going to dive deep into that. But then, I'm coming back to, well, why? Why do you have heart disease? And that's when we're really starting to investigate the limbic system, the autonomic system, the stress system. And there's several tests that I do for that. Vibrant has a neurotransmitter test, just measuring neurotransmitters. And one of the pieces in there is it's going to look at the balance of, the calming neurotransmitters, the excitatory neurotransmitters, and all that stuff. Another one, which is maybe a little less obvious, is salivary hormones. It's going to look at estrogen and progesterone, testosterone, all that business, but it's also going to do several spot measurements so we can actually plot the cortisol over the day. And it should start high and kind of taper off. And what we find is a lot of people are flatline, which means at the very end of the day, hey, they're normal. Well, they're not normal. They're flatline, right? So that's a really good thing. And then, sometimes I do blood draws where I'll have them go to the lab and they'll get a before 8 a.m. blood draw for cortisol, and then one at noon and one at 4 p.m. or something like that. But those are the main ones. And I really think, the problem is we have this very simplistic view of, you have adrenal fatigue. Well, many times people actually have high cortisols in early stages of adrenal exhaustion.
Yeah.
So if you're just looking at hormones, you need to look at that normal band, right? And if it's above the normal band, that's no better than it being below the normal band. So these labs, I think, can be extremely helpful. They're not that helpful for me, frankly, but they're extremely helpful for the patient because they look at it, they go, oh, wow, this is really screwed up. Look at all the red.
Right? I say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it gets their attention. Whereas before people say, well, yeah, I have a lot of stress, but everybody has stress. Well, not everybody has as much stress as you have. Plus, the stress is not about the event. The stress is about your relationship to the event. I have a patient who's an air traffic controller, as an example. And he retired early because he was having some cognitive issues. He couldn't remember. He knew what word he wanted to say, but he couldn't say it. And that's a bit of a problem when you're an air traffic controller.
Right.
So, but other people go on to retire, at mandatory retirement age. I think it's 62 and a half or something like that for air traffic controllers. but he had to retire early because of the stress-related illness. So some people have a different relationship to the stress, and it's that relationship that really causes the stress response. And so that goes back to the whole meditation and how do you expand that moment between stimulus and response, and so I'm a mountaineer, and you can be standing on the side of a mountain and you can see a big avalanche falling down, and you can panic and freak out. But the avalanche is over there, right? It's way over there. It's not where I'm standing. So I don't really need to panic right now. I need to do smart things right now, but I don't need to panic. And it's the same thing with stress. Something is happening. Is stress really helping, or is it hindering? The vast majority of the time, it's hindering.
And there's that idea of perceived stress.
Hmm?
I think that's very, very interesting, and it helps, at least for me, put it into perspective. There's stressors everywhere, but how we perceive it, how much do we perceive the severity, and how we respond.
There's three kinds of stress. I think there's real, or maybe conflict is a better way. There's real, there's perceived, and there's imagined. So real is I came after you, right? I was after you. I was really, in your face. I did it on purpose. That's real.
Yeah.
This middle idea is you said something, and because of my past stuff, and it wasn't anything, you didn't mean it. You didn't mean it as a slight in any way, but it triggered me, right? It's like, I was maybe some dog when I was a kid was playing with me, and he was jumping around, and he scared me because he was so agile and so much bigger than me. But now as an adult, I'm scared to death of dogs. But it's because I have this sort of fuzzy memory attached to dogs from when I was a kid. It's not because this dog is dangerous. And it's the same thing with everything in life. You say something and it goes ding, and I go back to 6 years old when something happened to me, and it triggers me. So that's the sort of perceived. And then the imagined is none of that happened, and I just made it up. But all of them are real. Yeah. They're all real, and they're all painful, and they're all traumatic.
They all
so
affect
we have to sort
us.
that out.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's important to really say all of those affect us physiologically, which is the problem, because it's too often the case. And I'd love to segue into GI health, because you touched on the limbic system, but as you said, 70% of our immune system lives in the gut. And you mentioned in a prior interview, virtually all your chronically unwell patients have GI complaints. And it sounds shocking, but it's true. And it makes sense, especially when you realize how common poor digestion is, because it's a consequence of chronic fight or flight, right?
Yeah, right. Well, something like 15% of primary care visits are for GI related issues. But if you really ask your chronically unwell patients, they all have gut issues in one way or another. And so that becomes, there's this old adage, and I've sort of embellished it a little bit. My version of the old naturopathic adage, disease starts in the gut. And from a functional medicine point of view, I like to say, unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise, start in the gut, because it is a central focus of leverage, right? You've got neuroendocrine issues in the gut. You've got microbiome issues in the gut. You've got inflammation issues in the gut. You've got immune system issues in the gut. So it's like this confluence. Getting back to the limbic system, I like to say that the place where the subconscious becomes conscious is at the breath, right? It's easy for all of us to control our breath in one way or another. Most of us can't control our heart rate or, other functions. And so the breath becomes the central focal point for that sort of limbic system balance. But for the rest of the body, it really, in a lot of ways, the gut becomes that centralized place for intervention, because it's the confluence of all of these things, and it's the gateway to the body. We think of the gut as being in us, but really we're like a donut. And I like to say that we're like a donut, often filled with simple carbohydrates and trans fats, like a donut. But there's a hole through the donut, and that hole, that's our GI tract. and it's outside of our body. So it's really the gateway to the body, and it's where we put a lot of emphasis. 70% of our immune system is right there at the gate, right? And so it's a great place to intervene.
Right.
And in functional medicine, we have a couple of mnemonics that I think are just brilliant. The first one's called dig in. So dig in stands for digestion, immunity, then gut function in general. That's the G. I is inflammation, and N is nutrition. So those are sort of the major silos to think about within the gut. And then we have this idea of the 5R program. It used to be 4R, but we added a 5th R. So we think about, okay, we're trying to manage the gut. What do we need to remove? So identify and remove anything that's dysfunctional or imbalanced. So removing bad stuff, right? If it's toxins or if it's bad bacteria or whatever it is. And then we want to replace. So remove is number one, replace is number two. We want to replace deficient stuff, whether it's vitamins and minerals or digestive factors like enzymes or bile acids or, things that help with gut integrity like glutamine or I'm a big fan of bovine immune globulin, so I use a ton of those. And then reinoculate. Well, that's kind of a misnomer because the only thing that really changes the microbiome is changes in diet. So when I think about reinoculate, I think a lot about diet, but also the other thing that can change the microbiome is a fecal transplant. And when I tell people that we can either do diet or fecal transplant, they usually choose diet.
The former.
Yeah, let's do diet instead. So reinoculation, we're trying to restore a healthy balance, right? So I like to use bovine immune globulins because they're pretty targeted. They're killing off a lot of pathogens. They're not really affecting the probiotics very much. And then I also give prebiotics. So prebiotics is the diet rich in prebiotic foods, but then prebiotics supplements because the more diversity of prebiotic you give somebody, the more diverse their microbiome is likely to be. So we're inhibiting the bad guys, we're promoting the good guys. So that's really reinoculation in my mind. And then we're giving extra stuff for repair. So that might be amino acids, glutamine, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, phytonutrients. I use something called fruits and vegetables, which every little scoop has the equivalent of 20 servings of fruits and vegetables from an antioxidant and phytonutrient point of view. And many of these polyphenols that are the phytonutrients are actually prebiotics as well. And then the most important R is really rebalance, because if they don't rebalance their lifestyle, if they don't stop playing killer games for relaxation, if they don't stop eating bad food, if they don't stop their stress and all this stuff, then their dysbiosis and gut imbalances are just going to come right back.
Right.
So this rebalancing, implementing long-term diet and lifestyle modifications to maintain long-term gut and just general health. So that's the functional medicine approach to thinking about the gut.
Right. And the 5R protocol, pretty well known, I feel, in the functional medicine world. And again, that means many different things to many different people, whether they're a dietitian or a PA, conventionally trained, et cetera, acupuncturist. And I never thought of this. I'm wondering in the 5R, where do we address that? Let's slow down, chew our food, rest and digest.
That's rebalance, right?
Okay.
Yeah. I live with a 17-year-old guy who is he's a beautiful man, and he's a football player and a huge athlete, and he eats one plate of food at a time with little to no chewing. And then, not too long ago, he had a stomach bug, and the first thing he ate once he felt like he could was a Dairy Queen flamethrower burger. It's like, buddy,
Why not?
let's talk this through. So, yeah, this is a big problem in my life and in my practice. But we have our habits, and we're Americans, and we're always in a hurry, and we got to eat fast, right? And so I like to think mindful eating means put your fork down between bites.
Yeah.
So that's part of rebalance. Rebalance is how do you eat? So take a bite, put your fork all the way down and chew it and think about how it tastes and think about the conversation that's happening. And if it's a contention conversation, tune out of it because we're going to digest better in rest and digest than we are in fight or flight.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that's a critically important piece of the puzzle. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I was saying, Dr. Salt, that comes back again to me, at least, is that mindfulness piece, like you were talking about with, just being present and mindful of the state you're in and what you're doing.
If you, I don't know where this came from, but I love it. It's, if you have one foot in the future and one foot in the past, you have nothing to stand on in this moment.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, because you did such a beautiful job of expressing sort of the timeline that you walk through with your patients and how you have to look at those triggers and what was setting that patient up for some of the symptoms and issues that they're having. Do you ever have issues with patients remembering these sort of pieces in time of maybe what triggered it? I mean, I'm just thinking in my own case, I don't know if I'd be able to remember, back to my childhood and some of these, the traumas that may have occurred.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. We do our best, but part of being in chronic fight or flight is cognitive impairment and not really solidifying and codifying memories. So many times they're lost, many times they're repressed or suppressed. And I administer an adverse childhood events questionnaire to most of my patients, and it's interesting how many patients say, "I don't really remember my childhood," and that's kind of sad, really, because my childhood was a blast. It was fun, but a lot of people it wasn't, or even we're raised by human beings. And human beings, by definition, are traumatized, right? And so so many of my patients, they have this sort of perfectionism. And that perfectionism comes from trying to please somebody in their family. And it's like, they could have come home with straight A's and their dad or somebody might have said, yeah, but you could have had better handwriting. Or in my case, I turned in my paper and got it back. And as he was handing it to me in college, he said, this was a really interesting paper. And I look at it and it's got a D on it. And I'm like, well, now what the hell? Oh, there's too many misspelled words. Well, I'm dyslexia. I can't spell my own name, But somehow I that actually happened in high school too. And I got this idea in my world that spelling was more important than ideas, right? So I walked around thinking that I was just a doofus, a moron, because I couldn't spell. When in fact, I was tutoring my friends and they were getting A's and I was getting B's or C's. It was kind of infuriating. But we have this system that doesn't really affirm unique ways of understanding and learning. There's one way, and it's the way that's on the test. And that's traumatizing to a lot of people. Certainly was for me. So, trauma doesn't have to be a horrific event. Trauma can be feeling abandoned because you have a distant and fuzzy memory of your mom going to the grocery store and leaving you home alone for just a little bit too long.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Very true. All very important and profound things to touch on that connect so well to this whole conversation. And I wish we had more time to dive into that piece. But that begs the question, how do you address all this? And another point I learned about your practice, Dr. Salt, is that you have a health coach on your staff to help with the how and the why once you, let's say, prescribe, recommend, advise your patients, because from a volume perspective, I just imagine that's a game changer in time management. So I'm wondering, have you ever had a health coach for listeners out there? When did you decide to bring one on? If you haven't always had one, really interested in that.
So I used to, I put almost everybody on some kind of therapeutic diet because we need So you can do like a food sensitivity test, right? And so that tells us what the blood is sensitive to, or you can do back pricks and figure out what the skin is sensitive to. I like to know what the person is sensitive to. So I do a comprehensive elimination diet followed by provocation. And I used to just hand them this piece of paper, right? Here you go. Here's a piece of paper. And I found out that, nobody did it. And I thought, well, gosh, I guess that's not that surprising because it's a thick piece of paper and it looks really intimidating. Why would anybody do that? So that was really when I realized that you can give somebody the best plan in the world. But as I say in business school, a B plan will be beaten by an A implementation, or I should say an A plan with a B implementation will be beaten by a B plan with an A implementation every time. It's implementation that matters. The plan doesn't really matter. I mean, it's important, but it's not the thing. It's implementation that matters. And so I like to say, I know what to do, but my coach's job is to figure out how you can do it. Mm-hmm. So my coach isn't really saying, this is how you do it. They're saying, well, how's this going to fit into your life? What do you think?
Yeah.
And then asking questions until the patient answers their own question. And that's how it becomes powerful. The power isn't, oh, okay, well, here's what you buy and here's how you do it, because they can read that. The power is, how is it going to fit in your life? And how are you going to answer that question with, the appropriate questioning and affirming and so on from the coach. So that's really the power of a coach to me. The power of a coach is not prescribing how to do it. It's figuring out how to enable the person to do it in their own life. And when that happens, suddenly your compliance goes through the roof. And then the fact that they've been on 3 elimination diets already, it turns out they never really did it though. And then now they're actually doing the elimination diet because I told them it was important, but I didn't probably take the 2.5 hours that's required to have them understand why it's important and to help them fit it into their own life. My health coach does. And then all of a sudden they do the elimination diet and lo and behold, they have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or they have gluten, blah, 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 whatever they have. And a lot of their stuff goes away. Then we heal their gut and then they don't have a sensitivity anymore. And, it works just amazingly well.
I think it's a secret sauce. It really is in finding how they can apply it to their own lives in a very practical and sort of seamless way. That's
my
brilliant.
First health coach was a manager at a Taco Bell. And I was in line and there's this guy. There's this guy in front of me who is livid. And I'm listening like, what is this dude's problem? The problem was that the guy who took his order had a thick Spanish accent at Taco Bell. It's like, well, it's sort of a Mexican restaurant, but he was really mad about it. And so she comes to the window and she handled him so beautifully. When I got up there, I said, wow, I was going to order tacos, but I want to hire you. And she says, what? I said, yeah, no, you handled that so beautifully. We need to talk. Can I give her my phone number and stuff? And I ordered some tacos.
You discovered her.
I love it.
Yeah. I imagine it makes a huge difference. And that counseling does take so much time, as you said, Dr. Sult, and it really is required for good compliance. So
it is. I mean, the truth is what is it? Something like 30% of people actually do what the doctor says to do. And actually, I had a really interesting interchange where a woman came back and she didn't do anything. And she was sort of blaming me. Like, oh, that stuff didn't work. And I said, oh, what didn't work? She said, well, the diet didn't work. And I kind of probed about, well, what do you mean the diet didn't work? And it turns out, well, she didn't do the diet. And then she's saying, well, the diet's just too hard. And so I just kept pushing a little bit, too hard, obviously, because I don't know if I can say this or not, but she said, you're really being a prick about this. Well, I think, I'm just trying to make it clear that you're the one who didn't do it, not me. But, people get really angry when you sort of call them on their stuff, right? And it happens. And the coach has a different philosophy. My philosophy is sort of, I'm an allopath, right? Allopaths are kind of jerks until proven otherwise. So my sort of initial response is, my way or the highway, let's go. And that turns out not to be the functional medicine way. The functional medicine way is, let's meet you where you are. And if you're on the ding dong and ho ho diet, okay, well, we're not going to change that right now, but what can we add to it? Can we add some broccoli to your ding dongs and ho hos? And, can we just slowly move this needle in the right direction? And that's, really where the health coach can go. It's like, I don't have time to cook. Okay. Well, so what do you do for dinner? I go through the fast food line. Well, what if you went into the grocery store and just went to the deli?
Right.
And got some food that was maybe just a little bit better? Yeah. Well, I'm just afraid it takes so much time to get out of the car. Well, look at the line. It's all the way around the fast food place. What if you just got out of the car, walked in, got your deli stuff and walked out? I bet that would be faster. And then they actually play a little game and they time it or something, and they go, oh, it was twice as fast. So, and then, oh, by the way, while you're in there, as you're walking towards the deli, grab one of those pre-made salad bags. I mean, is that perfect? No, it's not. Oh, and by the way, next time you go shopping, why don't you get several bags of frozen vegetables and some frozen, chicken breasts or something. And those will just be in your freezer. When you get home, you throw them into a pan and you fry them. You cook them in healthy oil. Get some avocado oil and just do a stir fry. And I'll bet that's even faster yet. And it turns out it is. And so, just these little tiny steps with the coach is expert at, like, yeah, I've been here before. I've talked to people like you before. I understand it's too much. It's overwhelming. It's really problematic. But we're just going to discuss it and it's going to be okay. And whatever you decide is going to be fine.
Yeah. But I think building in that time in the visit when they're meeting with the health coach after you to have those light bulb moments, that's a game changer right there. So I thought that was really, really helpful for listeners to hear from a practice management standpoint. So I'm glad we touched on that. And I'm going to wrap it up so we can get to the fun stuff, which are our rapid fire questions, Dr. Sult. And before we do that, I want to thank you for being here with us today. We've learned so much. We've really defined what functional medicine is, how we can practice it mindfully, how we can really help patients using all these wonderful tools. And you have a way with analogies. So that really helps me put together the pieces. So thank you for that. And let's move
one
on.
last thing I want to say about functional medicine. In functional medicine, we do what the Lipitor commercial says to do. And the Lipitor commercial says, after a trial of diet and lifestyle, consider Lipitor.
There you go.
And if you do the diet and lifestyle right, you probably don't need the Lipitor.
So true.
Great point. Let that marinate. And we're switch gears to our rapid fire, Dr. Sult, and send you on your way. First one, what does your ideal Sunday look like?
Oh, get up late, sit around and chat, probably read a little bit, go for a bike or a run. I hurt my ankle years ago, so I'm more of a bike rider these days. My ideal Sunday would actually be at a place called Battle Abbey in the Canadian Rockies. And we would put the skins on the bottom of our skis and hike up to a peak and then ski off the backside or something. But just an ordinary Sunday would be some tea. I'm not a coffee drinker. I'm not a coffee drinker because I think it's bad. I'm a coffee drinker because it tastes like burnt toast swizzled through hot water. But some nice tea and a book, and that would be an ideal Sunday.
Okay, next one. If you could dine with anyone alive or deceased, who would it be and why?
Well, there's 1,000,002 people, but I'm going to just say my wife, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
She is far wiser than I am, and we always have a wonderful time.
Simple as that.
Very touching. All right, last one, Dr. Salt. What is one piece of advice you would give your 20-year-old self if you could go back in time?
Don't be so wrapped up in yourself. I said earlier, I have dyslexia. I was so good at third grade, I was invited back for a second go. I was in special ed from third grade through high school, and it just weighed on me that I was just a moron and an idiot, would never be worth anything. And I think we all carry those scars in one way or another. And the truth is, as Martin Luther said, we are simultaneously saint and sinner. It's easy to love the saint. It's a little more challenging to love the sinner. But I like to think of the sinner as, a little boy, in my case, a little boy acting out. Do you want, what's the right response to a little boy acting out? Is it whacking him, or is it picking him up and holding him and loving him? So on. So if we could speak to ourselves the way we would speak to our best friend in our most compassionate voice, that would be a miraculous game changer for most of us. Because we're the ones who beat the crap out of ourselves.
Absolutely. We are our worst critic, that is for sure. Well, what a wonderful way to wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Dr. Sult. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I know our listeners have too. Let them know where they can find you.
Well, so when you sent me a little message, you mentioned that my website link was broken. It's fixed now, and it is Just Be Well, JustBewell.info, not .com.info. So justbewell.info. If you go to YouTube, I've got a YouTube channel, which is Just Be Well FM, which was supposed to be functional medicine. I didn't realize that was also like a radio frequency, but Just Be Well FM is our YouTube, and Just Be Well on Facebook as well.
Fantastic. Well, until next time, everyone, stay vibrant. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guest and host are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.